My name is Małgorzata Szuleka, and I'm a Polish lawyer working with the Helsinki Foundation for Human Rights. Make no mistake, we have no headquarters in Finland. We are an entirely Polish organization, and we are one of the biggest and oldest human rights organizations in Poland. What we do is we provide legal aid and legal assistance to victims of human rights abuses. We also monitor the legal changes and the challenges to the human rights protection in Poland. And we're also very active in monitoring and trying to mitigating the consequences of the rule of law. Today there are three things I would like to speak to you about, and the things are, the first one will be the daily struggle of a lawyer. The second one is the failure of imagination. And the third one, I would try to provide to you with some glimmer of hope. So maybe let's start with the first, a little bit therapeutical point, which is the daily struggle of a lawyer. In the last 7 years, I cannot count or remember any single day in my work when I wasn't asked by, be it my colleagues, representatives of other organizations, ordinary citizens, members of the family, what actually the rule of law crisis in Poland means. So what really is that, and why we should take care of that? So there are a couple of answers to that. Rule of law crisis in Poland, but also in any other country, means the first thing is the legal uncertainty. If you go to the court with your case, you cannot be sure whether your right to fair trial will be guaranteed. You cannot be sure whether the decision is final and binding. You cannot be sure whether the other states' institutions that are going to be bound by this judgment will act upon this. Because the rule of law crisis means, in the terms of legal uncertainty, that nothing is certain anymore. That there will be always a way to either not acknowledge the judgment, pretend it hasn't been published, so it's not binding, or bend the rules, the procedure rules, in a way that serves only the people in power. But you can say, okay, I've never been to court, I have no intention, I'm not married, I'm not going to divorce, I'm not going to sue anyone, why should I care? Okay, so if you don't care about legal certainty, then think about the democratic process. The rule of law crisis in democracy means that all democratic procedures that are there in line can be bent again to the interest of the governing majority. That the voting procedure may not be fully, changed bluntly, so the governing majority would win, but there might be some tricks introduced into that the elections will be free but no longer fair. So, for example, the governing majority can spend lavish amount on commercials in the TV, or they have state media that simply are the propaganda tube. And at the end of the day, before you even notice, this governing majority, thanks to all of those things they implemented into the democratic process, will stay not in office not for 4 years, but for 8, 10, 12. You can get used to them, actually, in that sense. But you can say, okay, but why should I care? I don't vote. If you don't, that's a big problem, but let's leave it for another discussion. But you can say, democracy will resist either way. So here's the third point. If you don't care about the rule of law crisis, the rule of law crisis cares about you. And it will get you at some point. It will get you either if you take it to the street and protest. Because if there's a rule of law crisis, there is almost 100% certainty that the human rights space is going to be limited. It's going to be limited, for example, by limiting the space for freedom of assemblies. So you can be prosecuted for that, or you can be beaten by the police. And if you are beaten by the police and you have no legal certainty, there will be no effective criminal proceeding into that. So you are deprived your access to remedy and right to trial for that. But it can go even further. It can open the doors of your home and actually start living with you in your living room or in your kitchen And that means the violation of your privacy or reproductive rights. Should I say more about the almost abortion ban introduced by the Polish captured Constitutional Tribunal, which is the exact consequence of the rule of law? So here's the thing. Rule of law will get you at some point. The trick is to be aware of that before they get you. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the failure of imagination. You may say, okay, but this is Poland specific. This is the country somewhere in the east, this is the weird government, the people brought them to themselves, the same thing. But here's what I'm saying, the failure of imagination. Don't make that mistake. Don't think if this cannot happen in your country. Think about Hungary, for example. Viktor Orban made his entire political DNA out of bending the rules, out of capturing the system, out of installing his own people across all state institutions and companies there are. But you can say, okay, Poland, Hungary, they are the scapegoats for the rule of law. Why should I care? Haven't you heard Matteo Salvini praising Kaczynski for the rule of law changes? Doesn't this raise the red flags for you? Premier of Slovenia, Janša, saying that we need a new definition of the rule of law. So this is not just a country-specific element, something we discussed during long legal conferences and discussions. This is a part of already existing EU discussion, and it's in the middle of that, in the mainstream of the political and legal discussion, how to capture the very essence and the meaning of the rule of law. So if you think of that, just for a second, think how your country would look like if there was no rule of law. And that leads me to the third point, which is the glimmer of hope. It's not that we have nothing to do and just sit and wait for the crisis to happen. Actually, citizens can be very proactive in that, in participating in democratic processes, in keeping your governments accountable. That's something that is going to prevent you from the rule of law crisis. And I just 7 years of monitoring the rule of law and crisis in Poland, and the last 2 weeks of information coming from Ukraine made me quite pessimistic, I must say. So when I was thinking how to just finish my speech today, I thought about a quote from Marina Huli, who is a Russian-born Polish activist, and she was famous for the work she did for Chechen kids seeking asylum in Poland. And earlier this week, she was rewarded by the US ambassador for her work. And in her acceptance speech, she said something I would like to share with you. She said that right now, one of the things we keep hearing most from our friends, colleagues, and partners from Ukraine is the call to provide to them the bulletproof vests. This is like #1 equipment they are needing right now. And what she said is that that bulletproof vest is a kind of symbol, because we can provide it to them, but we also have to think about ourselves, and that's the point. So if you support an organization that provides humanitarian aid in Ukraine, if you take care about the victims of hate speech in your own country, if you care about unaccompanied children traveling from Ukraine and who has no guardians in your country, if you take care about the EU migration policy, if you take care about the democratic process, if you vote, if you keep the governments accountable, that's when you can become your own bulletproof vest for your democracy, for your country, for your community, for future generations, and most important, for yourselves. Thank you.
Grazie.